Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Mr. Popper's Penguins. Today we are reading chapter 17. This one is called Fame. If you will remember, when we were reading last week, the Popper Penguins got signed on with Mr. Greenbaum and started performing in the theaters, and they disrupted the other performances, but everybody seemed to love it. So this chapter is called Fame. The birds soon became so famous that whenever it was known that the Popper performing penguins were to appear at any theater, the crowds would stand in line for half a mile down the street, waiting for their turn to buy tickets. The other actors on the programs were not always so pleased, however. Once in Minneapolis, a celebrated lady opera singer got very much annoyed when she heard that the Popper Penguins were to appear on the same program. In fact, she refused to go on the stage unless the penguins were put away. So the stagehands helped Mr. and Mrs. Popper and the children get the birds off the stage and downstairs to a basement that was under the stage, while the manager guarded the stage entrance to make sure that the penguins could not get past. Down in the basement, the birds soon discovered another little flight of steps going up, and in another minute, the audience was shrieking with laughter as the penguins' heads suddenly appeared one by one down in the orchestra pit where the musicians were playing. The musicians just kept right on playing, and the lady on the stage, when she saw the penguins, sang all the louder to show how angry she was. The audience was laughing so hard, no one could hear any of the words of her song. Mr. Popper, who had followed the penguins up the stairs, stopped when he saw that it led to the orchestra pit. "I don't think I'm supposed to go up there with the musicians," he told Mrs. Popper. "But the penguins did," said Mrs. Popper. "Papa, you better go get them off before they start biting the pegs and the strings off of the fiddles," said Bill. "Oh dear, I just don't know what to do," said Mr. Popper, sitting down helplessly on the top step. "Then I will go catch the penguins," said Mrs. Popper, climbing up past him with Janie and Bill following. When they saw Mrs. Popper coming after them, the penguins felt very guilty because they knew they did not belong there. So they jumped up on the stage, and they ran over the footlights, and they hid under the singing lady's blue skirts. That stopped the singing entirely except for one high, shrill note that had not even been written in the music. The birds loved the bright lights at the theater and the great laughing audience and all of the traveling. There was always something new to see. From Stillwater out to the Pacific coast they traveled. It was a long way now to the little house at 432 Proudfoot Avenue, where the Poppers had to worry about whether their money would even hold out until spring. And every week they got another check for $5,000. When they were not actually playing in some theater or traveling on a train between cities, their life was spent in large hotels. Now and then a startled housekeeper would object to having the birds register there. "Why, we don't even allow lapdogs in this hotel," he would say. "Yes, but do you have a rule against penguins?" Mr. Popper would ask. And then the hotel keeper would have to admit that there was no rule about penguins. And of course, when he saw how neat the penguins were and how other guests came to his hotel in the hopes of seeing them, then he changed his mind and was very glad to have them. You might think that a large hotel would offer many opportunities for mischief to a lot of penguins, but they actually behaved very well on the whole. They never did anything worse than riding up and down too often in the elevators and occasionally biting the brass buttons off of a bellboy's uniform. $5,000 a week might sound like a great deal of money, and yet the Poppers were far from rich. It was quite expensive to live in the grand hotels and to travel about town in taxicabs. Mr. Popper often thought that the penguins could just as well have walked back and forth between the hotels and the theaters, but every single one of their walks looked so much like a parade that it always tied up traffic. So Mr. Popper, who never really liked to be a nuisance to anyone, always took taxis instead. It was expensive to have huge cakes of ice brought up to their hotel rooms to cool the penguins off. The bills in the fine restaurants where the Poppers often took their meals were often dreadfully high. Fortunately, however, the penguins' food had stopped being an expense to them. On the road, they had to give up having tank cars of live fish shipped to them because it was too hard to get deliveries on time. So they went back to feeding the birds on canned shrimps. This cost them absolutely nothing, for Mr. Popper had written a testimonial saying, "Popper's performing penguins thrive on Owen's oceanic shrimp." This statement, with a picture of the 12 penguins, was printed in all the leading magazines, and the Owen's Oceanic Shrimp Company gave Mr. Popper an order that was good for free cans of shrimps at any grocery store anywhere in the country. Several other companies, such as the Great Western Spinach Growers Association and the Energetic Breakfast Oats Company, wanted him to recommend their products too, and they offered him huge sums of money, but the penguins simply refused to eat spinach or oats, and Mr. Popper was much too honest to say that they would, even though he knew that the money would come in handy. From the Pacific coast, they turned east again to cross the continent. They had enough time on this brief tour to touch only the larger cities. After Minneapolis, they played in Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. Wherever they went, their reputation traveled ahead of them. When early in April they reached Boston, huge crowds awaited them at the railway station. Up until now, it had not been too difficult to keep the penguins comfortable, but it was a warm spring day, and the warm spring wind was blowing across the Boston Common. And at the hotel, Mr. Popper had to have ice brought up to his room in 1,000-pound cakes. He was glad that their 10-week contract was almost up, and that the next week, when the birds were to appear in New York, was to be the last. Already, Mr. Greenbaum was writing a new contract. Mr. Popper was beginning to think, however, that he better be getting back to Stillwater, for the penguins were growing irritable. Oh my goodness, I wonder what's going to happen with irritable penguins. I wonder what's going to happen to them. Are they going to start causing trouble and getting into mischief? We'll have to wait till tomorrow to find out.